Today's lesson is investigating compositional strategies. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the idea of how to place a focal point. Through today's lessons, we need to be able to define what a focal point is, explain why it's important to think about where a focal point is located within a composition, identify a variety of strategies used to help place a focal point, and describe how they've been used in exemplars. And lastly, we want to make sure that we're able to apply strategies for placing a focal point through your process work. For example, in your thumbnails and preliminary sketches should show evidence of this concept being applied. Most importantly, it needs to be evidenced in your final pieces that you produce. So what is a focal point? Simply put, it is the center of visual interest in your work. It's where you want the viewer to be looking most of the time. The artist attempts to direct the viewer's attention through the deliberate use of a variety of different visual strategies, such as the use of line, such as color, such as value. The focal point may or may not be in the actual center of the painting, and this point has to do with this idea of placement. The first idea of placing a focal point is using the notion of symmetrical balance. In this case, we'd have two focal points, one on equal distance from each other using a line of symmetry. How this is applied to an actual photograph is if we take a look at Andy Warhol's composition Campbell's Soup Cans from 1963, right, even though there are very slight differences, right, we are not using a mathematical definition of symmetry, we're using a visual definition. So there's slight differences from one side to the other, right, but here we have two axes of symmetry, one running down the center of the image top to bottom between the clam chowder and the beef, all the way down to split pea and cheese soup. We also have a horizontal line of symmetry between chicken gumbo on the left and bean soup beneath it, to the Scotch broth and the minestrone on the right. These lines create a sense of visual balance throughout the work. The second is the idea of asymmetrical balance, and here we're paying particular attention to the notion of difference. The left side is visibly different from the right. Asymmetry is very similar to the mathematical definition where the two sides don't look anything alike. So in this example, Gentile da Fabriano's The Adoration of the Magi from 1423, asymmetry has been used if we divide the picture top to bottom. We notice that the right side is extremely busy. There's a tremendous number of figures, darker values compared to the left side, in which there's emphasis on the small child sitting on Mary's lap, which is the woman in blue, and her father, right? There's just a few figures that are in that half of the composition. So asymmetry is the difference from one side of the image to the other. Radial balance is like an explosion or a starburst, where there is a center and there's typically lines that radiate out from that center point. A typical example, or famous examples of this, are rose windows from the Gothic era. This particular example is from Strasbourg Cathedral, which was made between 1176 and 1493. Here we have the center, this 5 little circles in the center of the window, and the very deliberate and obvious use of lines all radiating out from that center point. This is the most challenging form of visual balance, and this has to be informal, right? Because what we're dealing with here is not difference, but is more about similarity. There's an approximation from one side to the other. So in this visual example, right, we have a red dot on one side and a bunch of small green dots on the other. Right? Even though they're not the same, right, they are not exactly totally different either, because the collection of small circles is somewhat round, similar to the red circle. right? And even though the red and the green are opposite, are different colors, they are also complementary so that they work informally together in order to create a unified composition. So informal balance in Eugene Delacroix' The Death of Sardanapalus from 1827 is that if we're looking for a line of an axis line, and this particular example runs diagonally through the bottom left to the top right. Right, the figure of Sardanapalus, the man with the long beard in white, is informally balanced by the woman and the man down in the bottom right. The red of the couch that the man is sitting on is informally balanced by the scattering of red that is in the bottom right. Likewise, the busyness and detail in the bottom left is somewhat approximated by the lack of detail in the top right, so that the two parts are informally working with each other in order to help draw our attention to different points in the image. The rule of thirds comes from photography, in which we divide the picture space up into 9 equal parts using 2 vertical lines and 2 horizontal lines. And what we're looking at here is the intersection of the two of these horizontal and vertical lines. Where the lines intersect is where photographers would be placing focal point. All right, at the same time, we can take a look at paintings as well, and we can see that our artists are using this this concept as well. Jacques-Louis David, in Oath of the Horatii, has actually used the 2 columns in the background as his visual third lines, right? And the base of the column, where it meets the ground, and the capital of the column as his sort of horizontal rule of third lines. And through this, we see an approximation of the 3 brothers on the left, on that 1/3 line, the women in blue on the other, and working together in order to create different places to look throughout the composition. Quartering is a very informal technique. It's where we draw a single vertical line through the center of the image and a single horizontal. And typically in this strategy, what we're doing is filling up 3 of the 4 quadrants in order to create a space of visual rest. Edward Curtis's The North American Indian Canon de Shelley Navajo from 1904 is a really clear example of how this principle has been applied. Because we have the rock face up in the top left, we have the plains down across the bottom with the figures riding their horses, and then the mountains and cliff faces in the background there, filling up the bottom right quadrant. The sky, however, is completely empty. So, to apply your knowledge, there's going to be 3 images that follow. What I'd like you to do is to sketch out the images in your sketchbook, just really quick thumbnail type images, just so that it provides a visual reminder of the image that you're referencing. And then determine which method has been applied to position the focal point. So to do this, the first step is you need to identify what the focal point is and describe where it is located. Once you've done that, make sure that you're justifying your response. Provide an explanation as to why you believe that a certain strategy has been used. So, our first image is Edgar Degas' The Rehearsal of the Ballet on Stage from 1874. So identify the focal point, describe where it is in the composition, and again, explain why you believe the particular strategy has been used. You may need to pause the video in order to complete the entry in your sketchbook. Our second image is Francis Bacon's Head Surrounded by the Sides of Beef from 1954. Again, identify what you believe the focal point to be, describe where it is located in the composition, and explain and justify which compositional strategy the artist has used in order to create this piece. Again, you may need to pause the video in order to complete the work in your sketchbook. The last image is Ilya Repin's barge haulers on the Volga from 1873. Again, we're going to be taking a look at making sure that you can identify what you believe the focal point is, describe where it is located in the painting, and lastly, explain and justify which compositional strategy the artist has used.